Okay, so we have talked about the time after the Romans. We've discussed whether it was a dark age or not. We've looked a little bit about what's going on in the old Eastern Empire with the Byzantines. Today we're going to look at the period that's known as the late Middle Ages, looking at between 1000 and 1300 AD or CE, focusing mostly on Europe for this time period. Okay, during this period, Europe's population grows, as does the economy. And one aspect of this is the rise of what is known as capitalism, the economic system that we use today. It's based on private ownership and the investment of resources or money for profit. No longer is all the money just with the local government. Okay, do they own all the land and all that? And as happened during the time of feudalism and manorialism, where land was the symbol of wealth, it's still important, but now you start to have money coming back into the system with gold and silver and copper coins and other metals that were used. A lot of merchants become very wealthy during this because of trade, and they invest their money in other enterprises to help other people do the same thing. Feudalism begins to give way, and you begin to have the establishment of a new economic and social order. This period of time becomes known as the Commercial Revolution, and there's a lot of things that go into that. You have advances in our agriculture, okay, that all lead to an increased food supply, and as we've discussed many times before, increased food supply means larger population. It begins to get a little warmer in Europe. As we said, that part of the problem that caused the collapse of the Romans was the fact that the planet had gotten cooler and you'd had a kind of a mini ice age and had forced those barbarian tribes south. Now you have a warmer period which allows more land to come under cultivation and people can grow more crops. You have new methods of farming taking advantage of more land. They start using the three-field system much more widely. They begin to use horses as plow horses and beasts of burden. They develop new harnesses, new technologies. Horses can move much faster than oxen do so that they can plow a lot more land. Okay, as I said before, the three-field system comes into play in a much wider place. So now they're using 2/3 of the land instead of half because they used to just leave 1 and 1. This, again, contributes to food production, and people who are healthier, who have more to eat, resist disease better, so they live longer and the population grows. Okay. You also have the development, mostly in cities, of what's known as guilds. Okay, and these are basically kind of like a modern-day union or an economic group that comes together. Usually it's an organization of individuals in the same business or occupation, and they work to improve the economic and social conditions of members. Okay, the first guilds are merchant guilds. They usually banded together to kind of control the number of goods being traded and keeping the prices up. So they would use this more as a cartel, similar to the monopolies that you learned about last year in 8th grade in the United States. In addition to this, the skilled artisans, the people who made stuff, glass, wine, tailors, druggists, and all sorts of things, come together to create what are known as craft guilds. And oftentimes you had husband and wife working together in the family business. These guilds set the standards for work, wages, and the working conditions for everybody. By about 1000, people are manufacturing stuff by hand, both for local consumption but also for trade. More and better products become available, and because of the wealth they generate, these guilds become very powerful political and economic forces because they're the guys paying the taxes that support the kings who are trying to establish control over the pieces of land that are their kingdoms and break the back of the feudal system where the power was more decentralized. Okay, so the Commercial Revolution, as I mentioned before, this is what this period is called. Okay, some causes and effects of that, and there's lots of effects due to this. Okay, you have increased trade, need more workers working in the factories and in these craft shops, okay, for lack of a better term. So serfs run away from the farms and they move to cities and towns where they'll get paid money for their labor. You have an increase in trade, which leads to more cash. Banking and lending services need to be available so people can pay for this stuff. And it leads to more money being available for building businesses. And increased trade also it contributes to merchants' wealth and power to expand. The local lord loses power, and the money starts going away from the landed aristocracy into the cities where these merchants are, and they have the money to pay, like I said, the taxes that help to increase the power of kings and the wealth of kings. Okay, so all these factors basically based on the increased trade, the whole expansion of business leads to a whole lot of stuff. And I'm going to ask you to write about a little bit this at the end of the video. Okay, so this also leads to the growth of cities. Okay, people move out of the countryside to the cities because that's where the job is. There's money to be made. Okay, population rises almost by 25 or about 1/3 to 25% over the course of 150 years. People move out of the manors, move to the town where the money can be made. Towns sprout up everywhere, mostly at seaports or crossroads, hilltops, and along rivers. Any place that was good for trade. Living in a town wasn't always the greatest thing. You could make more money there, but the towns and cities were dirty. There's no sewers, so people dump their trash in the streets and their human waste in the streets. Okay, people don't bathe very often, and their houses don't have a lot of windows or a lot of light, and they don't have clean water. They're built of wood with thatched roof, which is basically like dried straw that they put on the top of these roofs. Actually, it's green straw that, as it dries, forms a bond that's impermeable for the most part to water, but it burns real easy. So you have a lot of fires in these early towns and cities. Okay, all of this leads to the rise of a middle class. The old social order begins breaking down around 1000. The traders, the artisans, and the merchants begin to form a new class in between the nobles and the peasants. The nobles don't like these guys because they have money, and the king is looking for money, so it decreases their power. They see the towns as a disruptive force, again, taking away from their power. The clergy isn't real popular with them because many of these businesses made money by lending money, which the church declares immoral. So there's a lot of conflict going on between the social classes, and this will lead to a number of events that we will talk about down the road. Okay, more on the growing power of the merchant class. Okay, they don't really fit into any kind of social order of feudalism. Okay, so they organize themselves and they demand privileges. They want freedom from certain taxes. They want right to govern their towns. And they eventually gain these rights from the lords. Overseas trade is sparked by the Crusades, which we will be talking about shortly. And this leads to the development of a wealthy merchant class, especially in the Italian city-states. Unlike the noblemen, the people living on the farms who inherited their titles, these people are self-made. Okay, they use hard work and brains to make their fortune, and they feel that they deserve the same rights as the wealthy landowners. Okay, so all of this leads to a huge upheaval in European society, and a lot of things come out of that, which we will be talking about down the roads over the next couple of videos. So, just one last little thing. German towns organize themselves into what becomes known as the Hanseatic League. Okay, and the idea behind this league is that the towns band together. There is no real centralized government along what is now known as modern-day Germany. It's a whole lot of little governments. So these towns come together and they try to protect the merchants' interests from interference of government. This is capitalism at its root, trying to keep government out of business. And it's a fight that still goes on today with regulations and all sorts of other things that the government tries to put on business, and business pushes back and tries to get lower taxes and everything. So these issues that are going on today are not new. They've been going on for 1,000 years. Okay, so last two things, achievements of this period. Okay, literature. Latin is the official language of most scholars, but you begin to see writing appear in people's everyday languages so that the locals can read it. Most of these stories are based on the comings and goings of knights and lords, but also there's tales about the common people. Authors such as Dante, who wrote the Inferno, Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales, write stories about warrior heroes and ordinary people, and they show the courage, humor, and morality of these people and how they get through their everyday life. And the other big achievement is in art and architecture. They begin to move away from the Roman style of architecture, which is the term they use is it's a very heavy style of architecture. Big, heavy walls, not a lot of windows, not a lot of ornate sculpture or anything like this. The ability to create these things wasn't there. As people learn new building techniques, a new style called the Gothic style appears in Europe. You have an example here in the picture. Okay, they use these buildings seem much lighter, and they seem to soar and fly into the air with things called flying buttresses, which were architectural techniques that could support weight. They put the stone supports outside the buildings, which would leave space for huge stained glass windows. Cathedrals built on this style were built to glorify God. Okay, and this becomes a huge advancement in architectural design. So, what I would like you to do for our next class is to tell me what is capitalism and what was one cause and one effect of the commercial revolution. That's it for now.